So I had this thought that, I just thought I would share why Washington is in a good spot against Texas.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our media rights and soon to be mostly team-free, but until then, beloved and loaded Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy. So, the Huskies play Texas in a college football playoff semifinal. Second time they've reached the 14 playoff, the only Pac-12 team to do so twice since it began back in the 2014 season. That's how it will end as they go off to the Big Ten. But I was having this thought about Washington's matchup with Texas, and Washington's an underdog, which, surprise, surprise. Just a quick note on that, by the way. Washington obviously was undervalued in the Pac-12 championship game in the eyes of the betting community. I think they might be again here in the college football playoff semifinal. I think the generalized narrative that they've been underestimated all year, if you look at this point spreads that they've had week in and week out, I don't think that that is actually true. I do think that they are in a good spot against Texas. Why? Well, first of all, there are well over 25 players on both teams that played in the Alamo Bowl between these teams a year ago. That was a Washington win. They were the better team on the field. Now, do I think Texas is a better team this year than last year? Yes, I absolutely do. But there are a couple reasons why I feel like Washington's in a great spot here. Number one, Texas's pass defense has not been great this season. I believe it ranks 95th nationally in college football, competing in the Big 12, which I don't think is the best conference in America. At the very least, I don't think it's as strong as the Pac-12 this season. So when you look at what Washington does well, that's a pretty good matchup. They went up against statistically one of the best passing offenses last week against Oregon in Las Vegas, and they were just fine. Michael Penix had a really good game, only had one interception, multiple touchdowns, was hitting the big shots. They could do everything they wanted to. And the other kind of, subplot there in that Washington offense against Texas defense matchup is when I've watched Texas this year, I have really liked their defensive line. I think that's been their great strength. That was also one of Oregon's big strengths going into Las Vegas. And Washington's offensive line played exceptionally well. And if they play at that sort of level, I think Washington wins this football game. But the other kind of psychological component that I had pop into my head earlier today, this is all I think about college football for the most part. Hence the nature of this very show, which you all seem to enjoy at some level, and I very much appreciate, is that Washington is going up against a team who's favored over them because mostly, from what I can discern, Texas has recruited at a higher level than Washington and may, if you were to do a roster breakdown, have more 4- and 5-star talent for kids that were coming out of high school rated as such than Washington does. But I've seen Washington just win these games over and over and over again. Here's the other thing. The strength of that Texas team is its offense. I mean, Quinn Ewers, and they've got a great play caller in Steve Sarkisian as their head coach. I think that they're playing at a high level. They have the last couple of weeks. They put up 49 against Oklahoma State, 50, I think it was 7 or something against Texas Tech the week prior. They have been playing some really, really good football offensively. But when you look at the way that Texas is going to win big games, do you think it's going to be on the back of their defense when Washington's going to throw the football around a lot? I don't think so. I think this is a game where, like the 2 Oregon games that Washington won this season, I think both teams are going to end up scoring in the 30s. I've seen Washington play that game over and over and over again, and I've seen them win it over and over and over again. And yeah, the crowd might be a little slanted towards Texas, given the geographical location. I think it sucks the Huskies weren't able to get into the Rose Bowl, but That's, maybe the traditionalist in me, not liking that. And yeah, Washington is going to have to travel further. Every time you've come up with a reason as to why Washington could, or some would say should, lose a football game, they find a way to win, even when they're not playing their best football against ASU or Stanford or Washington State. But I look at that Oregon State game, and I think that was before the Pac-12 title game, in which they played their best. I think the Pac-12 championship game was Washington's best overall performance. I think their best individual win was at Oregon State, because Oregon State's a good football team, ridiculously tough to beat at home, and is a team whose strength defensively has been their secondary the last couple of years, though they certainly took a step back this year for sure. But the rain was coming down. Everything about that game. Washington was an underdog for a reason, only about 2.5 points, but they were an underdog for a reason. Everything about that game looked like it favored the Beavers. And a lot of people, myself included, picked Washington to lose that game. They could have lost that game. But guess what? Every time you look at a game in which Washington's played the last couple seasons, the last time they lost? Here's a quick 5-second trivia question. What was the last date in which Washington lost a football game? Ready, go. Okay, time is up. The answer is October 8th, 2022. You don't do that unless you are a team that is so good situationally, week in and week out. Their preparation, their execution, both those things have been so darn good over the last 2 seasons, really, since that Arizona State loss from a year ago, which continues to just make less and less sense. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you explain that one. But again, doesn't matter, because Washington's put themselves in this position. And so ask yourself this question. Yeah, Texas is a 4.5 point favorite. I'd lean towards Washington and the points there. I think the Huskies are going to win the game outright. And the reason is that, who do you trust more at this point in time, given the last couple seasons, but even if you just kept it to this season, who do you trust more in a game that is a 1-possession contest? Steve Sarkisian and Quinn Ewers, or Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix? That answer to me pretty clearly is Kalen DeBoer and Michael Penix, because they haven't lost one this year and they've been in those sorts of contests. So if you get into a high-pressure situation, if it's a close game, if it comes down to a key 3rd down or a 4th down or one play here or there that changes the tide in the game, you know what Washington is going to feel? Completely calm and confident, because they've been there, done that many, many times. And Texas had the close loss against Oklahoma this year. They've won every other game, to their credit. But what is their best win of the season? It was against Alabama. They played a really good football team, and they played a really good football game. They outplayed Bama, won the game by 10. Didn't have to execute against a great team in a big spot, because they were good enough to put themselves in a position where they didn't have to. I don't think you're going to be able to do that against Washington. And that is why I like Washington in this game. So rehash the Alamo Bowl, lack of passing offense or passing defense success from Texas this year, and the close game factor. I think all those things lean towards Washington in this particular game. I understand that Texas is favored. I think Washington is going to, for the 3rd time this year, win the game outright as an underdog. So leave your thoughts in the YouTube comments below, or hit me up on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. There was a proposal. Did you see this? Did you see that proposal that has not gained any traction just yet? But Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, came up with quite the idea. There's quite the company that we call Prize Picks, and that is what's known as the largest daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. The easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. That's it. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the names in the Prize Picks community each week. And here's the best part. Prize Picks offers a reboot policy, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits in the first half, does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Time for what is always my favorite part of the show. It's mailbag time. YouTube comments or Twitter, again, at smalls_55 or at LO_Pac-12. DMs and mentions are always wide open, especially as we go into the offseason. Ask about anything and everything. I'm always here to answer. Sports related, of course. This from Tyler. Spencer, what are your thoughts about NCAA President Charlie Baker proposing that there should be third Division I group? Don't know if he phrased that correctly. This would include the elite and wealthy schools. We're on the verge of having 2 super conferences. Those schools will split off from the NCAA. Way things are going, I don't see how the Big 12 and the ACC remain power conferences. Only have 2 power conferences, Big 10 and SEC. If the ACC does survive this realignment, it probably be group of 7. So that would only be the case if Florida State and a bunch of other schools were to leave, which they tried to do and failed. I don't know how they'd suddenly find the momentum to do so. I know there's talk about Florida State. They got to get out of the ACC. The ACC is not what did them in here. It just isn't. The Jordan Travis injury is. But the proposal from Charlie Baker, essentially, as I understand it, would remove college football. Well, first of all, I think it would move into designating players as employees at some level. I don't think that's a good idea. That's a different conversation, though. But essentially, it would separate college football from the rest of the sports. And this is an idea that's been suggested by people such as Chip Kelly, among many others. And I think there is some real value to it. Now, the 2 super conferences, with all this movement, it does feel inevitable. The question is whether or not it'll be a selective super conference. Now, if it isn't, and it is an all-inclusive FBS super conference that is, just the power schools that be, and you split into, 2 conferences and you make it look like the NFL, Boy, that was about to get really, really bad. Anyway, appreciate you bearing with me here on the show. If it went to 2 super conferences, the primary question that I'd be interested in would be, are you going to just pick and choose the most valuable television products and leave others behind? Are you going to form a relegation system? Or are you going to just have everybody be involved and bring Oregon State and Washington State back into the fold and not leave behind the Vanderbilts, the Indianas, the Purdue's, the Marylands, the Rutgers of the world, right? Among many others who struggle to compete in football at the Power 5 level consistently. That would be the question. So I think that idea feels like it's going to happen one day in college sports, but here's the thing. I don't think it's as soon as it may feel at times. These media rights contracts that the conferences just locked in and have got their teams and they're going forward and making a bunch of money and whoop-de-freaking-do. If you are going to put forward a deal like that, I don't think you're about to go back on it. When those deals get closer to ending, so we're talking end of the decade here, which is closer than people think. We're almost to 2024. I was muted there for a little point in time, so I'd edit this back. So let me backtrack a moment here. When you put human beings in positions of power, influence, and wealth, it is tremendously difficult to get them to give it up willingly. It is why there are term limits on certain governing entities, such as the President of the United States, and why there have been calls for quite a long time to have that on congressional members. Because when people get into that spot, they're not too keen on giving it up, one party or the other. And the same applies in the college football space. These conferences have so much power, so much influence. Convincing them to give it up and to see the governing structure that they have worked for so long to obtain, that's going to be a tall order. So I think it's a long ways away. And right after these deals, some of which haven't even fully kicked in yet, the realignment moves haven't taken place yet, that has to happen first before there could be another radical shift. It's certainly something I'm monitoring. The proposal caught my eye because it felt like, oh, okay, we're just going to go to, football being separated from the rest of the sports. Not a bad idea, by the way. I don't think we're as close as it feels sometimes. This also came in from Tyler. Spencer, another question for you. Outside of Washington State and Oregon State, which schools have the most to lose if the NCAA proposal goes through? How much more power does this give to the Power 2 conferences and the networks like ESPN and Fox? I don't know that ESPN and Fox, particularly Fox, could be more influential in college football at this point. I don't know how much greater it. I mean, they were literally behind the scenes a legitimate actor that caused the demise of this conference. Not the only one, but certainly one of them. So I look at what they have right now and say, I don't know how much greater it could get, because the media side of it gets super, super complicated there as well. But, the schools that would have the most to lose is if college sports decide we only want to play with the big kids and we'll give everybody else a lower level of competition to play at and relegate them down to the G5. I think that's unlikely. It's happened to Oregon State and Washington State. I don't know that everyone else is keen on doing it. It does, however, set a precedent, and not a good one. Would the Big Ten and SEC say, okay, we'll take Florida State, Duke, North Carolina, Miami. We don't need everybody else. From the Big 12, we'll take Utah, we'll take Colorado, sure, why not? We'll take the Arizona schools and maybe Oklahoma State and Baylor, and we'll just leave everybody else to the side. And then we'll just form our 2 mega leagues. Oh, by the way, we're going to boot out Vanderbilt, Indiana, Northwestern, Illinois. That would take a lot. I think that would take quite a bit, so I wouldn't worry about that happening just yet. A couple of media thoughts here. I talked about the potential of, CBS on yesterday's show, and people were pointing out in the comments section, CBS has a contract at the 3:30 Eastern window. The window that I was looking at that CBS does have available, I believe, is after the 3:30 Eastern game. So college football game's about 3.5 hours. So that would be about 7 o'clock Eastern time. Would they ever want to put on an Oregon State or Washington State game? I mean, if you give them a decent opponent, maybe they'd pay for it a la carte. But I don't think that CBS is the only option there. And there is one name I think we should all be aware of as for where Oregon State and Washington State could find their games, at least some of them perhaps, in 2024 and maybe beyond. I think you can find everything you need over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. Mine is the Red Rocket. It sits out in the garage. I've had it for 9 years now, and I never want it to go anywhere. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Let's all wind the clocks back, a la the Joker in 2008, R.I.P. Heath Ledger. Let's wind the clocks back, not a year, as he said, but a few months. Late September, early August. The possibility of the Pac-9, because Colorado had announced their departure, getting a media deal was still very possible. there was a deal that after many, many months of guessing and speculating, talking and everything like that, that finally emerged. It ended up not being good enough. Who was that deal with? Apple. I have no idea, have not heard or seen or read anything to indicate that Apple would be interested here. What I do have is full knowledge, as we all do at this point, that Apple was putting together a media rights package for Pac-12 football. I also know that Apple continues to be a player in the sports space with MLS and Major League Baseball, and they wanted to be a part of college football, and they still could be. If they wanted to try their hand at putting college football games on their platform, there may be an opportunity, and I would not rule this out. Would it be the best option? Perhaps not. Would it be a viable option? Perhaps so. And if you're talking about what entity is willing to pay the most for those individual games, hard to see how Apple wouldn't be the top target there, because they were willing to put together a media deal that initially was not going to pay nearly as much as the other conferences, which is why Oregon and Washington decided, nope, we're not doing this, and the Big Ten wants us, so we're going to go. And then the four corner schools said, oh, yep. Well, the three remaining four corner schools said, yeah, okay, we don't want to be here anymore. We need a better conference. And they went to the Big 12, and everything imploded from there. But Apple is an entity that when you're trying to jumpstart something, I'm no business major or business expert, but you're usually willing in the early going to put a little bit more than perhaps a well-entrenched competitor is, because you're trying to get something off the ground and make sure in every way you can make a good first impression. I mean, there were already going to be games had the Pac stayed together, and there were this year, they were on Pac-12 Network. I don't think Apple TV's distribution could be a whole lot worse than that. I mean, Bronny James is going to play his first game for USC basketball this week. It's going to be on Pac-12 Network. Could be worse. I mean, maybe it could be better. I don't know exactly what the numbers are. I know that watching Pac-12 Network and watching Apple TV requires a subscription that not everybody has, but can still reach a fair number of households there. And if you're Oregon State, Washington State, what other options do you have? I would make CBS tell you no for the individual games you want to sell. And again, the schedule's got to be finalized first. Like that all has to come together here for the sake of trying to keep more kids from entering the portal. And also, like, Oregon State's getting hit hard, really, really hard in the portal right now. Washington State, not as much, but Cam Moore not being there, well, that's certainly a concern for the Cougs and something they have to address. But I think that Apple could be a player, an option, because they've shown before, right? They started small with their MLB package, then they expanded. They started smaller with MLS games, then they expanded. And maybe they'd want to start small again and try to be a player in some other conference media rights deal or pick up a few games here or there. It's just a thought that I had. So I thought I'd share. Now, another question, and this is one that came in from Big Rig U. Before I get to that, by the way, if you want to see a hilariously well put together use of 60 seconds of your internet browsing time, of which you probably have many hours of doing throughout the day, go to pac-2.com. I saw it for the first time. I just randomly came across it. I don't know who put that together, but if we can figure out who did that, redirect them to me just so that I can give them a shout out. That is hilarious. Like, talking about making lemonade out of lemons. That website, it's just like one page for the most part, I think, is so fun. There are a bunch of little details in there. It's well worth your time. Anyway, this question from Big Rig U. I've heard rumors that Washington State and Oregon State may end up with most of their sports teams, including baseball, soccer, volleyball, cross country. Oregon State baseball in the semifinal of the College Cup, by the way. That's soccer, for those of you who don't know. Cross country, rowing, and possibly even softball playing the next couple of years in the West Coast Conference, similar to what BYU did when BYU was an independent in football. Oregon State and Washington State could even have basketball in the WCC, especially if Gonzaga is still there. The travel expenses would be the best option of all the potential options while they're figuring out what happens with the future of the Pac-12. Is there any truth to the rumors that Washington State and Oregon State settling several of their sports in the WCC for the next couple of years? 100%. That is okay, I struggle to say great option, but I think the West Coast Conference, that is a good mid-major basketball league. That is a consistently 2 to 3 bid NCAA tournament conference on both the men's and women's side. And, of course, the Gonzaga men are the premier program there, but there are other good teams and have been. There is precedent in that conference that does not have football and there are other examples, by the way. Hawaii competes in football in the Mountain West, and in all their other sports, they're in the Big West. So the West Coast Conference would be the best option. And yes, when you are currently about to undergo a financial crunch, the West Coast Conference would provide you the cheapest options for travel. They are all that went, like, now that you've removed BYU, for those who don't know, the West Coast Conference, a school, I attended one of their schools in college. I went to Santa Clara. They have Gonzaga. They have, which is pronounced Gonzaga, not Gonzaga. It's Gonzaga, Santa Clara, St. Mary's. Those schools are in the Bay Area, as is San Francisco. They have Portland. They have Pepperdine. They have LMU. Are you noticing a trend here? They have Pacific. That's in the state of California. If you're looking to, that would be severely less, because you think about funding an entire athletic department, all the travel and meals and hotels and everything like that. You'd save the most money while still maintaining competitive relevance in those particular sports, playing in the West Coast Conference for everything except football. And football will just essentially be an independent. I think that's the best option, even more so than the Mountain West, which is a higher caliber conference. Like, they have more quality teams. Like, if you look at their men's basketball conference, it's better than the WCC. They don't have a Gonzaga over there, but they do have a number of teams that make the tournament regularly. San Diego State just went to the national championship game. Utah State in the tournament all the time. They were last year. They have like New Mexico's had some good seasons. I miss it. Boise State basketball's been good. Fresno State, like there are bigger brands in the Mountain West, but I think rationally the West Coast Conference makes the most sense, more than the Big West or the Mountain West there. So yeah, that's definitely being considered, and I think would be the best option for the Beavs and Cougs. One thing to note about that, I've gotten a couple questions about this. What happens with the Pac-12 network and non-revenue sports with regards to the television? Well, if they go into the WCC, problem solved. The WCC just moved, finally, to ESPN+. So every sport that's not football, Washington State, Oregon State fans, you'll be able to watch them on ESPN+, because that's the deal the West Coast Conference just moved into this year. And I think that's a great spot for non-revenue and non-football sports to be on. So it's just the most accessible and the most common one. You got good branding there as well. I think the production quality is higher than what Stadium provides, which is who they had previously. So I think that's the best option there. As for what happens with the Pac-12 network, probably goes away, because at that point, they wouldn't have the inventory. And if those sports do find a home, then the Pac-12 network has nothing to broadcast at that point in time, because that would, that would go into effect not just for the road games that the Beavs and Cougs non-revenue sports would play, but also the ones, also their home games. Like, it would all be on ESPN+, and I think that'd be the right move there. So Pac-12 network probably done, unfortunately. Well, not everyone feels that way, but there are a lot of great people that work there. Yogi Roth, who's been on the show before, awesome guy, gave a really nice tribute when they signed off for the last Pac-12 regular season game. But that's what would happen, is whatever conference they'll go to, there's going to be a media situation there for the non-revenue sports, and the football just kind of has to figure it out. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.